Friends and folks, welcome to the Kaiju Lounge, your home for humor, opinions, and nerd shit. My guest tonight is the game developer behind such unique gaming projects such as Rough and Tumble, Clayton's Day Out, Waltz for Heaven, and a little game called Mario. Not to be confused with a little game we know called Mario. That's even more confusing. Never mind. Her latest project was a piece for the NYU Game Center's annual No Quarter event called Dreamscape Explorer, a Zelda-like adventure game that takes place in a 90s web browser as well as the actual physical space. Please welcome my guest tonight, Izzy Kestrel. Izzy, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm gonna hop in. I'm going to start with the hardest question first, because I feel like if we don't get this out of the way, it's going to flavor the remainder of the night.
Okay.
Why Gex?
Have you seen him? Have you heard him? I guess is a better
Not
question.
for a long time, I'll say.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so I have a personal background with Gex. Growing up, my grandfather, he was a gambler, right? He liked to bet big, he liked to win big. Which I think just necessarily as someone who gambles, you tend to kind of root for the underdog a little bit, where you like want to go, yeah, the payout's better, right? If you're like, oh, if the underdog wins, I'm gonna do better.
Right.
And he purchased the ill-fated 3DO that came out in the early 90s. And I remember that was such a blow, because it was like, I believe it was like $700 or something at the time.
It was up there with the Neo Geo. Like there were two very
Yeah,
unfortunately expensive machines.
extremely expensive machine. Had made a lot of big promises that did not pay off.
Right.
Within a couple of years, it was deeply discounted. Uh, I remember that made such a mark, that a couple of years later, when my grandmother would send us out to go purchase a PlayStation for like just for the kids to come over and play
Right.
at their house. We came back with a Sega Saturn, and she said no, 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 no. I know the PlayStation is the one that people want right now. Go back and get a PlayStation.
Wow.
But yeah, so if you don't know, the 3DO was the home of Gex, to begin with, who is a wise-mouthed lizard who likes to watch a lot of TV. And that's kind of his whole thing. He's voiced by comedian Dana Gould, and he just loves pop culture and loves quipping. And I just was so fascinated by it at the time, because it was so impenetrable to me in a way, where like he was saying all of this stuff that I didn't really understand, right? Like most of the quotes that he would say are all from like stuff before my time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was just a strange thing. And I was like, I don't know what this means, but it has the cadence of a joke, so I'm gonna laugh at it.
It was
And
the attitude of 90s attitude mascots, and that's
yes,
what really drew you into the character.
yes. And then once again, I think I suppose that um, like my grandfather, maybe I inherited this from him. I also like to bet on the underdog, and Gex did get 3 games total. There was a unreleased prototype that came out a couple years ago for Gex Junior, so possibly it could have been 4 games. Um, but I don't know. I'm just fascinated by him, and I've kind of carved out this niche for myself where, there are Sonic stands, there are Mario stands, obviously. There are even like if you go further down the line, I think there are like Bubsy stands. Like there are people that kind of fall on either spectrum of like popular mascot, not so popular
Yes.
mascot. I feel like Gex is a little bit more in the middle there, and I think that's an interesting space to play in.
Yeah, I feel like Gex was a thing I only really knew from like All Might Game Pros, right? I'd
Yeah.
see him in ads and stuff, and not until I learned how to access certain things as I've gotten older did I ever get to experience the games. And I'll say this much: it is better than Bubsy, and Bubsy did get a re-release or something fairly recently. So
Yeah.
there's
Right.
something to be said about the untapped potential of Gex. And you say 3 games, but one could argue 4, as I believe there is a Gexfield game in your itch.io as well. I was going to save this question for a little bit later, but I just want to say that now that I see kind of a tie here, uh, does Gex's sort of wisecracking nature, and more so the reverence, the spoofs, the parody that kind of built that character is built upon, do you feel like there's an influence there in some of your work where you have things like Lonk's Adventure, Gexfield, Snake, you've done some of these sort of parody things, or these sort of like homages in a way that are very goofy or silly, or kind of avant-garde takes of these classic games. Do you think is there a connection there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I obviously would have connected the dots on Gexfeld because it's a Gex fan game effectively.
Right,
Um,
right.
you know, and then I think some of my more recent stuff like Universal Studios theme parks Adventure. I am hitting that like I want to do pop culture stuff and riff on things. Um, I think like if you go back older, like my virtually competent era, making Snake or Lonk's Awakening or any of those games, that wasn't in the forefront of my mind. I think that I was
Mm-hmm.
doing pop culture riffs, and maybe because those are explicitly video game parodies, like I'm riffing off of other video game franchises,
Right.
which like that is also pop culture. I think it becomes more distant in a way from for me, where I think about like Seinfeld and like that's a touchstone that everyone understands. If I'd go talk to my grandma about Solid Snake, like she's not gonna know who that is or what that is. Um,
So she knew that she wanted a PlayStation. So
she knew she
you never
wanted a
know.
PlayStation, so she could have,
She might have.
theoretically, she might have just rented Metal Gear Solid for a weekend and played it. For all I know, I have no idea.
The secret lives of grandma here. I love
Yeah.
that.
Uh-huh.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. I mean, it sounds like part of it is because there's also a personal tie towards gaming, maybe more so than some of the larger zeitgeist stuff of general pop culture. There, when did you get into gaming as a fan? When did you, before you knew you wanted to do development? What was, we talked about the 3DO a little bit, but what was the stuff
Uh-huh.
that captured your imagination as a kid?
Yeah, so as for as long as I can remember, I think I've been into video games. I know that my first console was an NES. I think I got for Christmas at some point when I was young. Um, I had Bubble Bobble for it. That's kind of like the
Nice.
main one that I
Yeah.
remember. Um, Even prior to that, I do remember like in like preschool or something, one of the teachers brought in their Atari, and we played some probably god awful port of Pac-Man. But I was
For
like,
sure.
what is this? Like, I need to know more about this. And it's funny to me because I do like credit a lot of things to my family of just like the way that they were, like my grandpa obviously buying video games and like supporting that hobby, um, all of my stuff. And I think the more that his definition of gaming, of like the gambling sort, kind of collided with my definition of gaming. He got more invested. So I do remember like him buying a booster box of Pokemon cards at one point, and be like, "Yeah, kid, let him rip. We're gonna
There
get
we
that
go.
Charizard or whatever that big dragon. I don't know what the name of it is, but I know it's worth a pretty penny." Um, I'm looking off screen right now, and I have a license plate on my wall, that just says Pokemon. It's a personalized license plate, from my hometown, in Iowa, in Dubuque, that just says Pokemon because he bought like some fancy car and he wanted to impress me, so he got a Pokemon license plate, which is very cute.
That's
Um,
adorable. Oh my god.
yeah, yeah, he was a lovely man. Um, Yeah, so my grandpa supported me, my grandma supported me, my mom, we would stay up until too late into the night playing Super Mario Brothers 3. And it'd be like 2 a.m. and she's like, "Oh, you got school in the morning. We need to stop." Um, that's still her favorite one. She always says, "I like the one with the maps," which, there are other ones with maps, but that's to her, that is the one with the map.
It scans. It scans. Adult brain. I kind of
Yeah.
get it now. Yeah.
Well, the first with the map, sure. Um, and Yeah, I think that just kind of continued having my family support me and want to uh, be invested in my hobby, and also like quite often playing with me or like engaging with it with me. Or so I remember one moment where I was in like a Goodwill or something, or like a thrift store, and I saw Boogerman on the shelf, and I picked it
Yeah.
up and I showed that was probably like I'm in like college or something. I showed my mom like, "Hey, do you remember this?" And she's like, "You no, what is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, I had this when I was a kid. You bought it for me." She's like, "I did." Oh no. So I don't know if she was always super tuned into to what kind of stuff she was exposing me to, but I'm fine with that. That worked out for
Yeah.
me.
I feel like my dad had a lot of the same proclivities because his big thing was always go to a Goodwill, go to where the tape cassettes are, and
Mm,
find the albums with the most interesting cover art and just buy it, and we just
yeah,
see what we got from that. And I think
I
that
love
led
that.
to him being kind of a luddite, not really always being connected into mainstream pop culture, but more just whatever he likes.
Hmm.
I think he would just go ahead if a birthday was coming up, he'd probably buy video games in the same way, which led for a lot of very interesting Sega Genesis
Yeah,
gets.
yeah. Oh man.
So when did the transition go from being just a gaming fan to development and starting to
Yeah.
to make?
So I had been interested in probably most people that play a video game are just like how like
At some point, yeah, for sure.
people make these, right? It's like this doesn't just come out of like this didn't come from space. It just didn't like willed into being. I was always like a very like technical person. I like when I was a
Mm.
kid too, I was also like doing computers, and like my mom ran a business. She did like sold like pools and spas and billiards tables. Interestingly enough, some arcade machines and pinball machines before I was born, so that actually didn't factor in at all. They just like got rid of that stuff right before I was born
Oh
for some reason.
no.
I guess they knew I wouldn't, I'd be on the
They
show
could
floor all
sense.
day. But then I was still on the show floor, like hitting the slot machines because they had the slot machines out there on display, and I could just open it up and get all my money back out, which is probably not a good lesson for me to learn. Um, but yeah, I had I was the technical person in the family. I was doing all of the IT work, even for my mom's business. I guess it was my grandma's business at the time. When AOL became like a thing, they were like, "Oh, Izzy, can you set up the America Online master account?" And I'm like 8. I shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm like, so like the main, master account name was like Pikachu 56565566. It's a bunch of fives.
Yeah, of
And
course.
then like a decade later, my grandma, because she still apparently for a long time used that AOL account in her home, just to check her email. She was like, "Hey, I need to like update the billing. Do you remember the password?" And I'm like, "Grandma, I was 8. I'm like in my 20s. No, I don't. It's probably Pokemon something. I don't know." Um, so questionable, but yeah, I was always into computers. I was into software. Any kind of like technology thing I could get my hands on was interesting. And I feel like in my early days, I would see things online of like um, RPG Maker like looms large in my mind of like the really, really old like RPG Maker 98 that was like
Yeah.
translated into English by someone who I think like English was like they might have been Russian or something, and their English was their second language. So like even the translation was not really full. Um, just a bizarre feeling to like spelunk into that program. And I'd plan out these big like dramatic ideas for games, mostly like focusing on like the side quests and like what you do after the game. kind of classic game designer problem is like I'm gonna think about all the fun stuff,
Yeah.
the extra stuff, and not the actual like core mechanics.
Yeah, you're gonna
Um,
make the crust, and the filling of the pie will just kind of happen on its
we'll
own,
get
right?
there. Yeah, we'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
So I, never really finished any of those games. Never really shipped anything. Never really, yeah, whatever. That's a child playing basically.
Or a
Um,
1,000%. Yeah.
yeah, and then as I got older, I, went to school for informatics. Computer sciencey kind of stuff. Like, just kind of felt like a safe career path. I was interested for a little
Hmm.
while to do like journalism and kind of like go into games writing because I like to write too. But I felt like computers are a safe path for me to go. I can get a job there. I can do, AV or whatever. I never thought that games were a path for me for a long time because
Hmm.
I am abysmally bad at math. Like I might have like some kind of learning disability kind of thing. I numbers just don't work in my brain,
Okay.
and I thought like, oh, programming is all numbers. That's not gonna work for me. And then I found the first tool that I really got into that I made pretty much everything that Virtually Competent put out was a tool called Construct, and it's very much like a sort of no programming required kind of thing, which, they say that there's still like logic. You still need to know like what is a variable, what is a loop, kind of like the basics of how that stuff fits together.
Yeah.
But there's no syntax, right? You're not writing code, you're like picking things out of a UI menu. And that just clicked my brain in a way that other things didn't. And I think after doing that for a number of years, I kind of started to see like, oh, well, no, I can't actually do this. I can learn JavaScript. I can learn a programming language. I can kind of get further into this. And then it just kept kind of, sliding from there, I guess.
It kept moving onward. So you get into the sort of the virtually competent stuff. Um, as you were kind of getting more and more into this, you know, and building out what game development looks like to you, when did you start kind of getting into this sort of I don't know how to best say it because it's a very unique flavor to a lot of the stuff you put out there because some of it's very tongue in cheek. I mentioned the Dreamscape stuff. You talked about Universal Theme Parks Adventure. Like, there is an element of this that is a lot of subversion of the norm here. When did you kind of start moving towards that, or were you always kind of like had an inkling towards that in the first place? You weren't looking to make the next great platform, or you really wanted to, play with people's expectations.
Yeah, I think that with Virtually Competent specifically, it was very much like understood at the beginning that this is like a hobbyist thing. Like I'm doing college, I'm doing like, I was working in IT for a little while at the university,
Mm-hmm.
um, and kind of uh, making my living in another way. But I kind of just like wanted to play at being professional for a little bit. I think like it's funny. Like I think
I think
about,
we all do sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like
Just
I think Virtually
cosplay a
Competent.
professional.
Right, that's kind of what I was doing. We're Virtually Competent. I think all of those games, I mean, a lot of them are silly and weird, and there are parodies in there, there's stuff like that. Um, but the other notable thing about them now, when I kind of look back on that work, is most of them have like title screens. Most of them have like some semblance of a menu. So most of them have
Mm-hmm.
like there was some attempt, maybe some stronger than others, but like there's some attempt to make like even a thing in a game jam be a cohesive whole where it's like it has a start and an end.
Right.
Um, and I think in my personal work, kind of following that, I collaborated with my friend Clover Greenhalgh, and she did all the pixel art, and that was very much like our aesthetic. Like all of these games are defined by that art. Um, and I'm not an artist, so I haven't really gone that direction. But like, I'll make stuff in with clay, or I'll make stuff in like I'll draw things, or just kind of like hack 3D models together, whatever to do. Um, and I think maybe part of that just like kind of necessitates sort of taking myself less seriously, where it's like I don't have Clover worked at Well, I met Clover because she worked at Budcat Studios, which was in Iowa City where I was living at the time, and they worked on like I think specifically they worked on like some ports of like the Guitar Hero games to like bring them back to like PS2, things like that.
Ah, okay.
Um, and Activision bought them and then shut them down. Um,
Of
and
course.
I was working at a video game store nearby at the time, and so Clover came to work at the video game store because it's like, what else, you know? It's just like that. This is what's nearby. I'm gonna go apply to the video game store, and I look at her resume, I'm like, this person made video games like in town. That's cool. And I do have to like give a lot of credit to her, I think, for just like entering my life in that way and being like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, this is a thing that I've done professionally. And me like meeting someone that's done that and be like, oh, really? Like you can do that. That's a thing that people just do that live in Iowa and not in California or something. Um, and she went on to like go work on like the Elder Scrolls MMO, and then like
Okay.
I think she's done some stuff in Call of Duty. I know she's still there now, but like you know, just really inspired me. And then also like having that talent that I could harness, I think I was like really excited to like make these things that looked and felt polished.
Right.
And then once we all got busy and had to like go our separate ways, I was like, well, I'm just gonna make some garbage now basically, as a palate cleanser.
But you don't feel the pressure of having to have like what you think of as a game, a polished piece of work.
Right.
It
Yeah.
relieves the shackles a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. There was, there were choices that I made in those old games that I don't have to make now because I was trying to hit like an audience or make something that was like very conventional. Like there are a lot more platformers and a lot more like there's like a shoot 'em up, and there are things that kind of like are pretty standard feeling, kind of trying to evoke like um you know Rough and Tumble is like it was made for a Game Boy Jam, I think. So it's like it's the monochrome like green looking stuff, and it's like very much trying to hit those marks.
Thousand
And
percent. Yeah.
I'm not trying to to do that anymore.
Do you have a favorite from that era? Because I know a lot of that stuff's still up on itch right now.
From Virtually Competent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I I feel very attached to Lonk's Awakening, which is I made it for the Flappy Jam, which was specifically kind of a counter protest, like a protest against the people that were like, Flappy Bird's so popular. Why? It's just Mario. It's pipes. It's the pipes from Mario, And whatever you feel about that, like harassing the developer was not cool.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and so they someone organized a Flappy Jam to be like, you know what, make a Flappy Bird and just like make it really bootleg, like just be really blatant with like ripping off other stuff. Um, so that was the prompt basically. It was like make a Flappy Bird, but then also mash it up with something. And I did Zelda. So it's Zelda Flappy Bird,
I love
and
it.
it's a funny little game that I liked enough. I mean, just probably because it was a Flappy Bird and it's simple. There's not a lot of the adaptation you need to do to bring it to a phone.
Hmm.
Um, I used it as a test case to basically see like, can I make a game in Construct, which is not, you know, it's not a Unity, it's not like an Unreal, it's not something that has really strong pipelines to bring a game to other platforms. It's mainly for browser games.
Yeah.
Um, and weirdly Wii U, they had like a Wii U dev kit. They had like an extent you could become a developer and get like a SDK to put stuff on the Wii U from Construct, which is very strange.
All right.
Um,
Sure.
yeah, I tried to do, but I never, actually shipped
The
anything.
Wii U was a desperate time for Nintendo. I get it. So
Yeah, that's my impression is they just really wanted to get more
there needs
surface
something
area.
on there.
Yeah, but I took Lonk's Awakening and I use that as my test case to be like, what is the pipeline for bringing a game from Construct, which is for web games, to port that web game to an iPhone or an Android? Um, and I feel like I was like pioneering that a little bit. Like no one else seemed to be doing this. There wasn't really
Right.
like documentation. There wasn't any kind of like nothing helpful. Nobody helpful. Um, Construct had like a pipeline for it. Like I could hit the export to iPhone button, but then there was a bunch of extra stuff you had to do afterwards that just wasn't clear.
Oh boy.
So I eventually figured it out, and I was able to put the game on iPhone and Android for a little bit. Um, and people, well, the first debacle. There's lots of controversy around this game.
Beautiful.
Um, the first debacle was that when I put it on the iPhone specifically, when you would download it and the first time you would start it, it would bring up that prompt to be like, Lonk's Awakening wants to check your location. Do you want to allow this? And it's not doing anything with GPS. There's no reason for
Yeah.
that prompt to be showing up. But of
It's not
course, people
pinpointing you. It's not
immediately,
following. Yeah.
right? I'm not doing anything with your data. I'm not getting any of that data. If the data is going somewhere, it's not going to me. And I'm like, I didn't put this here. It's some kind of bug with either Construct or the thing I was using it was like Adobe Phone Gap or something. Probably a service they don't even support anymore. But it was Construct and Adobe were kind of the two pieces, and then somewhere in the middle there was something going wrong.
Something was asking for information or triggering the location.
Triggering the location thing. And so people in the reviews like bombed it, like, oh, it's taking my it's taking my data, like And I didn't care that it's a free game. I didn't charge for it. Obviously, the copyright stuff of like it being a Zelda thing is already kind of like touchy. I just wanted to put it out there.
Yeah.
But I wanted to fix it, so I like went and posted in forums and like tried to figure out what was going on. Eventually figured it out. I found some hacky workaround that got that fixed. And then once I had that fixed, I think it was up for a little bit longer. And then Nintendo Life, which is still like an outlet today, I don't know if this person writes there anymore, but there's a person wrote an article about Lonk's Awakening and said, Lonk's Awakening, the title of the article was Lonk's Awakening is a Zelda Flappy Bird clone, and it is an abomination. And I love that quote so much. Like, who made this? And it was just
who had the gall?
who would do this to our precious Zelda? And I think it was just before Nintendo started doing their own app stuff where they had like Super Mario Run or like, there's probably something earlier than that even, but they, were kind of like, oh, the takedown's coming. Nintendo's going to come for these people. And I'm like,
these people,
it's like, okay, we're not charging for it. And we made all the assets. Like, I think it's funny. Like, it's not bad press. Any press is good press in this situation, at least.
Yeah, but oh, poor Nintendo, poor multi-million-dollar company having to bear the weight of this awful experience of someone taking their beloved IP.
Yeah, and twisting it into a Flappy Bird.
It's wild.
Yeah, so that was funny. So I think about Lonk's Awakening a lot still, just for those reasons. It's a very interesting project.
Well, did Nintendo Life ever come around and have anything to say about a little game called Mario? Like.
Oh, that's such a good question. I wish they had written something. I feel like they like owe me, right? Like I need like an apology article or something to kind of like a decade ago you said my game was an abomination. I need you to eat your words. Like come look at Gexfeld. Look at a real game. Look what the from the creator of A Lonk's Awakening comes an incredible breathtaking 3D experience. Yeah. I still at them. Whenever I'm talking about that quote, I still at them on like Blue Sky or whatever, just to be like, hey.
You absolutely should. Absolutely should. If you could find that, I'm sure the Wayback Machine, you could find that article or something and really.
It's still on their website too.
It is still their website.
Yeah, you can just go look it up right now.
I think like an old newspaper clipping. You need to print it and frame it. I think
I do. I should frame it. Yeah.
I want to talk a little more about the Mario thing because I thought I played a little bit about it first, and then I hadn't, without reading about what it was and the actual story behind it. And then the more I kind of
Oh,
dived into how
I'm
it built, it's
fascinated
like,
by what was your experience about that? That's fascinating.
I mean, I remember me like I'm playing through. It's like, oh, this is funny, this is silly, I like it. I get just a little game called Mario. Sure, we'll get away with it. And then it was just, it felt like a very slow descent into madness in some ways. Like the first thing I do is I'm walking around, I'm just being chased by parts of the level following
Yeah.
me.
Hmm.
It wasn't, it's not a horror game, but it certainly scared me. Uh, I honestly, I thought I really had a lot of fun because it became a lot of just like, all right, what else is going to happen?
Right.
You're already throwing things at me I did not expect from the jump, and now I'm just looking forward to see what happens next. So talk a little bit. What is a little game called Mario? How did this all come together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. You're like, what's gonna happen next? What's the game gonna throw at me? I ask the same thing every every time I open it. So the interesting thing about a little game called Mario, um, is that it was a joke. It started as like most of my ideas. They started as a bit that just kind of snowballs until it's not a bit anymore. It's a real thing that I have to like publish and manage and deal with.
It's been in your
I have
brain
to
too long, and you have to
bear the weight of
get it
it.
out
Yeah,
somehow. Yeah.
just eject it. Yeah, so someone tweeted like something along the actual screenshot is somewhere, but it was like paraphrasing, you always get that question when you're a game developer. It's like you introduce yourself to someone and you're like, "Oh, I make video games." And they're like, "Oh, like which ones?" And it's like I'm not gonna, I odds are I don't work on Call of Duty or like is something that you're gonna know. Like, oh, I made some
Yeah.
obscure indie game that five people have played. Like, I can't just say Gexfeld and you're gonna know what that is.
Right,
Um,
right,
so
right.
it's a weird question. It puts you in a weird space. And someone retweeted that and said, let's just always say that you like worked on a little game called Mario or something. Like you just like take a big name. It's like, oh, I worked on Sonic the Hedgehog. It's like, what do they know? Sure, why not?
Yeah.
And so my joke was that I was going to make a project that was open source, um, open to the community, that anyone could go and they could pull it up and they could try to mess with the insides of it. And I would title it a little game called Mario. And so the the actual title, a little game called Mario, you could, when someone asks you that question, and like you could say, you know, upload you could draw a picture and then upload that and put that in the game, or you could like make a really crappy level. Like you don't have to do anything important, right? You put some music in there, like you not music's not important, like you do
No, but yeah, I
whatever
hear you.
whatever kind of craft that you are good at. It doesn't have to be specifically like design or engineering or whatever. Just like you put some piece of yourself into this experience. um as soon as you do that, there a bunch of systems kick off and the game updates, and now that is the live version on itch.io.
It's wild.
um and including your name in the credits, right? The whatever name that you have on, because it's all through GitHub, so it's all like version control stuff like that. As soon
Hmm.
as you submit something, that code or that asset or whatever is signed by your name, and now your username is appearing in the published official game. um, and that's kind of the whole bit. And all I really did was I found some like platformer tutorial for Godot. And so I made in Godot engine, I just made this like really simple, like it's just like a blank screen with the little Godot heads as like the floor, and a little Godot head that it comes with as the character, and you can run back and forth and you can jump. I don't know if I have screenshots of that somewhere. I always wanted to do like a time lapse like version where you
Of
can
just
kind
all
of
the
like go back
changes.
all the different changes. Like that would be complicated, but every time you submit a change, like a preview build does get created. So technically, I think you could go back and play like the first preview build, and that would be
Oh
that
wow.
version of it. But it's like it's basically nothing, right? It's effectively nothing. I made a thing run and jump, um, and then it just slowly like started again. The bit started to snowball, and suddenly people were like making sprites for it, people were making like tiles, people were making music, people were making levels, and it really quickly became just kind of life its own. It's like it's not I past that
It's not
first
your
week I
game.
no, it belongs to the world. um Past that first week, I don't think I really did too much of any engineering. Like I didn't really do any code. I didn't add anything meaningful to the game anymore. What I really did was once it kind of started to like go viral a little bit, like GitHub tweeted it and all that. Um, I stood up a Discord really quick because I'm like,
Yeah.
I need some kind of like funnel for these people to know like how to get into this thing. Because I got a lot of people that just like didn't know how to make a video game, right? Or how to like
Yeah.
how do you any part of this process, they had no idea. And those are the people that I wanted to empower to like be able to do something. And so I stood up the Discord and I became did like really hardcore like community management basically for like a month of just like how do I like streamline this process? How do I like instruct people how to use like Git, which GitHub is like me like complicated for someone
Yeah.
who doesn't know that stuff, and like how do you make levels and how can I make like better tools for people to make this easier to contribute to. um and then like bringing more people in as people like put stuff into the game and like showed that they knew how to do things. I kind of be like, oh, like you're seem invested in this, do you want to like help me manage community stuff, do you want to help with the GitHub, do you want to help like people have Godot questions, can they tag you and ask for help. And it really was like, and still to this day, I think continues to be, it's much less active now, but I think the last time I looked in on it, probably like a couple months ago, there were levels that I had never seen before. There were things
Wow.
that I had content I've never seen before. Like, I think honestly, the surface of it is just too big now for me to really know,
What's
like,
going on? Yeah.
there's stuff in like there's definitely stuff in that game that I've not seen. I've just never ever laid eyes on it, and I may never because it's just there's so much of it, and it's just it's an incredible weird thing that I'm happy I was able to facilitate, I suppose.
I mean, it's an absolutely insane idea that kind of kicked off, but also like, admirable in the way of, much like yourself when you're talking about having sort of that experience of like, I can't make games, I can't do math, right? Right. Like that
Right.
aspect. And now you've literally created a platform which people are able to then teach themselves, game development. And
Yeah, very full
there's a lot
circle,
of
I
it.
feel like.
It
Yeah.
is very full circle. And I think there's always, I don't know. I've always had this fear that like gaming is becoming more and more prohibitively expensive in a lot of ways,
Right.
and we are losing, you know, access to certain communities to be brought into gaming culture and the gaming world,
Mhm.
and exposure to these sort of things. So having something that is not just free, but really, outside of a computer, like being able to hop on and play around with, coming with a community to learn, it's important to find sort of these avenues of discovery and learning and sharing and game development. Another such avenue here in New York City is the NYU Game Center, and that work there. I was introduced to your work through the lovely, lovely Holy Wow people,
Mhm.
Jackie and Dan, because they are
Those
fantastic human
sweethearts.
beings, both who I've
Yeah.
had on this channel. I was very honored they invited me out there, and I'd reached out trying to do an interview with you on the spot, and it was
Mhm.
chaos. I know it was
Was
chaotic for you as
chaos.
well.
Yeah. Mhm.
I didn't expect it to be that big, but before we get into all that, like the actual event itself, how did you get involved with the NYU Game Center? Have you done stuff with them before, or was it the first time being brought in?
Yeah, so that's a fun question. It is actually pretty close to my little Mario timeline. So this like just kind of like a whirlwind of events. I worked at Phenomena for about 6 months
Right.
until they suddenly shut down. The CEO was out as an abuser, and a very
Oh
dramatic
yeah.
implosion that happened. Um, but that was my first like professional games job. We were doing stuff in Roblox, which was very strange. Still to this day feels very strange. Um, but yeah, when that was kind of like I was laid off, and then I think I was like recovering from surgery that week. That's really fun to be laid off while you're recovering from surgery.
Oh
Um,
jeez.
I somewhere around, I think maybe like in the month leading up to that, I had been working on the what would be the first version of a little game called Mario.
Okay.
Um, and so I had made the game a while before I released it, and just kind of was like, like, whatever else, I'll sit on it for a minute, and then I'll put it out eventually. And then I got laid off, and then I was like, well, I'm just gonna put this out now because I need some levity. I should make something fun, put out a fun tweet instead of like being mad.
Right.
Um, and then I think it was maybe the the timeline is confusing now. I'm not sure, but somewhere within the span of like a week or two, I was laid off from Phenomena. I released a little game called Mario, and I was also I joined Discord, a game. So Douglas Wilson, a game developer designer that has worked on like Sports Friends and a lot of other cool things.
Okay.
I think most notably right now is a host of the Eggplant podcast.
Right. Right.
Um, done a lot of cool stuff. He is a big fan of reality TV, and so he has designed this like reality show sort of game that you play entirely in Discord. Um,
Huh.
and it's called Factions, and I think he's run it a couple different times, like on Discord, and then also like at like real life and events. But he was opening, he was putting, he opened up like in like people could fill out a survey and basically like apply to be a part of the latest game of Factions. Um, and so I was lucky enough to be part of that. And it was a very fun, weird experience. If you can like go look up you can still go in the Discord like now, and you can see all the chat history, which is really interesting, like all the backstabbing and stuff, all of the like private like DMs between like two people. Those are separate channels that are private to those two people. So you
Oh
can
wow.
like step into my chat with one other person and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna like vote this person out. And then you go step into another chat and see like, oh yeah, I'm gonna backstab Izzy in this next voting round.
It's like
Really
all the
fun.
best parts of the circle without getting to stay in the hotel.
Yeah, it was super fun, super interesting. But specifically, so the reason I bring this up is that I played this with Marie Folston, who did the curation for No Quarter.
Yes. Yes.
And so I met her through that Factions game. And then she reached out to me early last year to be like, hey, you've been on my list for a while since, Factions, and then a little game called Mario, because that was like immediately afterwards. Um, I would love for you to make something for this event, which was like a real it was a real moment for me because, if you go look back at like the history of people that have been involved in No Quarter, like I would say probably at least half of the people in that list are people that I like really admire and look up to, and I just having my name on that page along with all of them is just an incredible
That's awesome.
feeling and achievement. So um, yeah, it was really just a lot stumbling into multiple different things. If I hadn't been laid off from Phenomena, I might not have had the time to invest in this week-long reality show game. If I hadn't had that time to like put in the little Mario, do that for a month, like I might not have met Marie, I might not have been on her radar, I might not have been in New Quarter. Even when you're getting laid off from stuff, sometimes things kind of
Yeah,
just
look,
happen.
life's what happens when you're making other
Yeah.
plans. That's what my mom always said. So
I think my mom literally has like a piece of like wood or something with that burned into it. Yeah, you're so right.
It sounds good hanging over the toilet in a nice bathroom. Um,
Yeah.
So you end up making this game Dreamscape Explorer
Mhm.
for that. So talk a little bit about that. Where did the idea come from? Like, how did you decide to put this particular game together?
Yeah, so the really key thing about no quarter for me, and I think generally when I'm tackling any kind of project,
Hmm.
is like I want to focus in on what are the very unique parameters that I have at my disposal, right? It's like in this case, this is a live event. This is a live event that happens in a specific venue, and it is only one night. It's just for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Um, that that part really compelled me of like I want to make something that can only exist in this space, can only exist in this physical space, is like ephemeral a little bit, where it's like you can experience there, and then like you know, if it was super successful or something, maybe I'd want to try to like adapt it to some kind of playable form that you could like play elsewhere. But like the important thing is that experience there. I want to make that really suited and really sort of make sense in that space. Um, and so like really early on, I think my thing that I kind of focused on was like QR codes that you can scan a thing on your phone and then it takes you to a link and then you have access to something that you know if you had to type it in or something you wouldn't do it. Right? It was like a link
Right.
that you had to like type in. You're not going to do it, but it's pretty easy to like scan a thing with your phone and open something up. um, and I was interested in kind of making this thing that was like how do I make a game that forces you to kind of do not like an escape room necessarily, but kind of have that hide and seek sort of feel. Like I want you to like engage with the physical space. It's not just like
Right.
a hallway that you're walking down to get to another thing. Like you need to be looking around in the hallway. Like what is in this hallway? What is interesting in this hallway? What is, what's out in the commons area? Like what's on the tables? What's I want you to be enjoying. I can like use the physical venue that someone else architected that is now part of my game design. That is the level, right? I
I
was really
love
compelled
that.
by that idea. So that was a very early on, like this is what we're doing. We're doing something with QR codes. And then that kind of like built up into this thing where we have this sort of Frankenstein almost of like the main game that was on a projector was made in Godot. And as you said up front, it's like very much like a Zelda inspired kind of like you're walking around a 2D dungeon.
Yeah.
Um, and then all of the games that you played via QR code on your phone, um, every one of those was made in one of four sort of smaller game engines, which would be
Interesting.
Twine or PuzzleScript or Downpour or Bitsy were the four tools that we use. And we targeted all those because those are very like very simple. Like, Twine is just text, like it's hyperlinks. Bitsy is like, just three colors and it's just like small sprites.
Right.
And the idea is that, by limiting the scope of what the phone games could be, because of course early on we're like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this like really cool, like, if you've ever played like Space Team, or even you think about like a Jackbox or something, right? It's kind of like a similar principle where you have like these controls in your phone.
Yeah.
Um, but like if we have to make a custom thing for every single game, we wouldn't make very many games because it would be a lot of work. So the
Yeah,
idea
for
was
sure.
like, let's target these simple tools. We can make things really quickly in them. We'll make a couple, each person on the team will make a couple of them. And then I also reached out to other people that I knew to make things for them. And have like guests basically make a game, and then there'd be like little surprises, like, oh, the person who created Downpour, the person who created Bitsy, like they made their own game for this thing. And
Oh
then once you
wow.
play all of those games on your phone, there was some networking magic that would happen where it would send a signal back to the main game on the projector. And like say, you scan a code, you find a room with a door, you unlock the door. A door unlocks in the Godot game as well, right? So
Hmm.
there's kind of like this communication element that's happening. And yeah, it it was a lot of moving parts, and probably too many moving parts for for that event. Which is why we didn't get to talk because I was behind the scenes,
Moving the
uh,
parts, basically.
rapidly moving the parts, trying to tape them back into place, and trying to keep the whole thing, keep the wheels from just falling right off. Yeah,
That's it's wild. It's wild, and getting those things to talk together like that and interact. It's definitely uh yeah. I don't know. You know, you can't port that home, right? It very much looks like a game. It feels like a game as we think of a
mhm,
game, but it's not something, you know. And I think that was that's one of the things I felt like a lot of people at No Quarter kind of did very successfully. You know, was
yeah,
these weren't things I felt nothing felt like they could be ported. They were all games. They were all video games, but
mhm,
nothing felt like they felt like the experience had to be there, right? I can't
yeah.
get Tower of Typing into my living room, right?
We
Shit
don't
like
have enough
that.
clearance.
Yeah, right. Exactly, exactly.
You need to raise your
Um,
ceilings. You have to remodel.
I, I, I'm sensing another pattern here from what you've done with both a little game called Mario and here with bringing people in to make some of these mini games for Dreamscape Explorer. How important to you is the idea of community game building? It seems like, and not so, you know, a less generous version of it is where I'm getting other people to do the stuff, but really it's really about people getting to have their input and putting their stamp on something and being able to
Yeah.
come in and see the variety of minds and really, you know, we all have an idea, I think, socially, as far as within the world, of what we consider games to be. Shooters
Mhm.
are a certain way, platformers are a certain way, RPGs are a certain way, right? But when we are, you know, challenged to explore a bit more and think outside the box, we're all going to think outside the box a little bit differently. You obviously have done that, and you bring other people who are kind of doing those same things into your games as well. So how and is it on purpose, this idea of community within the game building as sort of a theme, and is something you're looking to explore and continue to do with future stuff?
Yeah, I think that I really enjoy working with other folks, like whatever capacity. Um, I think that I think for a long, especially if you look at my early work with Virtually Competent, because it all is also mechanical and so focused on like these are platformers, these are like, novel mechanics that are very like arcadey almost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a sensibility about games that is very I, I it's boring in some ways where it's just kind of like I make what I played when I was growing up and playing Nintendo games and Mario and whatever. And I'm not making like a Kentucky Route Zero. I'm not making things that like have like really engaging narratives. As much as I like writing and would really love to make something like that,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know if I have the life experience. I don't know if I have that like the pop culture exposure. Like I'm not reading enough books. I'm not engaging in other. I'm a very like video game brained person. I'm very focused on that. I just know that is my space that I really enjoy being in. And I think that I try to turn that to my advantage by I want to work with people that have interesting life experiences and that have things that they want to say and things that they want to do in games that like they might not necessarily know how to design that properly, or they might not have the coding stuff that I have. And being able to like lift up other people and make their vision come alive is very exciting to me. um and I also just like, I think you make games for people, right? It's like you
Yeah.
especially like as an indie developer, I think you look at something that's a AAA and a bigger kind of scope and scale. It's like you're trying to hit like the widest demographic, right? It's like I want to get as many sales in this thing. And when you're making something more personal, like that's always a lot more compelling to me, even if it's not something that speaks to my experience specifically. It's like I'm going to gain something out of it and probably learn something about myself or about the world from it. Um, and I enjoy that mentality, and I try to engage that with Dreamscape Explorer, especially where I had folks that I knew that I just like knew could make cool stuff. I had people that I like talk with a lot, and people that I uh some like just kind of shooting my shot, like, oh, people that I think are really cool, that I would really love for you to make something for this. I don't know if you have time, or if you like, whatever. um but like, specifically, I think about, there was a game. So Rob Dubbin was also at this event with
Right.
his game Tidebreakers. And he's also on the Eggplant podcast with Douglas Wilson. And also on that podcast is Laura E. Hall. Um, and I reached out to her because, I don't know. I just follow her, and I don't even know we've even talked up until this point. But I DM'd her basically cold, and I was like, "Hey, it would be really funny and really cool if you wanted to make. I knew she has like a writing background. If you
Mhm.
wanted to make a Twine game, that would be one of the dreams, right? That you scan from a QR code and access. But if you made it about Rob, if you can make a dream about Rob Dubbin, because he's, him, you podcast with him, and he's going to be there. And it'd just be really funny if it was like, oh, I put a QR code in the back of one of his chairs on his game display, and now people are going to scan it and have this little experience. And he's not even going to know, probably, because he's not going to like, he's going to be
Be
too
able to
busy with his
play
game to,
yeah.
right. And so it was down to the, like, I think she literally sent me her game like hours before the event started. So I'm really glad that we were able to make it
Wow.
happen. But like, she wrote this like lovely little Twine game about Rob, from his like background as like being a writer for comedy shows.
Mhm.
And very, very cute, very funny, very like, lots of references to like Rob's life. And I sent it to him afterwards and had him play it, and he adored it. But I love that, like, I was able to facilitate Laura making something specifically just for Rob. That is really fun to me, and I love that it could be like kind of just one small piece of this bigger picture, you know.
That's so awesome. I love that. Wow. um we're coming towards the end here already. So my final kind of question here I want to ask is unlimited budget. You are given the reins officially to the Gex IP. What do
Oh,
you do?
oh my God. I feel like I thought you were just gonna like make it open ended and just like, what project did any in the world?
Oh
And
no. Oh
I
no.
don't know that I would have thought about Gex, but I would have been like, oh, that's such a big question. Like, where do I even go with that? I almost think it's like a bigger question now of like, what would I do with Gex specifically? Oh my God, what wouldn't I do?
What is
Um,
the grand return of Gex look like under Izzy Kestrel's watch?
I think that I've personally always had, in 2015, Square Enix put out a call that they said, hey, if you want to make a game for these old IPs that are dusty and no one likes anymore, pitch us and we'll think about it. And those IPs were like Fear Effect, Anachronox, and Gex. And
Wow.
that was my moment. Like, I'm gonna shoot my shot. I'm gonna do this. I didn't submit anything because I wasn't
Oh
brave
no.
enough at the time. But at the time, I was like, I still think would be fun. I think it would be fun to do like, Gex's like current day, and he's kind of, the world's passed him by a little bit. He's still like watching the same old TV shows. He still has a cable subscription, right? He doesn't really know how the internet works. But then he gets sucked in, right? He still gets sucked into the internet, and now he's got to like learn what a meme is. He's got to like learn all these, like, what are these emoticons? Like, what does LOL mean? Um, and I think that when Gex Jr., the prototype that was apparently made in like 2001 and was
Mhm.
just not discovered until like to like
Wild.
2022 or something, 2021. Um, when they added Gex Jr. into the equation, I'm like, well, that's perfect, because now he has a child, um that can teach him things, and we can have kind of like this God of War situation where like he's like, big Kratos Gex, and then like the little kid kind of like they have to get past their differences and be able to reconcile those.
Right.
And I want it on the record that I made a joke about Gex of War, um I made a joke about this almost a month exactly. This is also very close to the whole phenomenon of layoff. All this stuff happened all at once. But I made
It
a
was a
joke about,
wild, like 2 week period or something.
yes, the wildest like month of my life. I made a joke on Twitter about Gex having a child and that being a whole thing. And then a month later, Gex Jr. was revealed, and it's like I willed this to existence. Like no one ever knew about this until I said something, and now I made this happen. So it really inflated my ego and kind of gave me this weird power complex that I have now with
Look,
Gex.
if there's no better sign, then you are destined to, bring back the prodigal son of gaming than
I
this. I
just
don't know
know
what
him too
is.
well. I just know him too well as a thing. Like I know what they were thinking when they were making these games. I know what they would be thinking if they were still making these games.
Fair, Val. At the very least, a consultant gig or something on this would be perfect.
Yeah, right. If I don't, I honestly, hey, folks, who are limited run games, you're on notice. You're releasing the Gex trilogy this year. If
Oh
I don't at
wow.
least have a special thanks or something in it, like the people would not be hungry for Gex if not for me advocating for the
Honestly,
past decade.
yes, keeping the dream of Gex alive, true and
Mhm.
well. Izzy, thank you so much for hopping on. This was a blast. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me in most places. My handle is not IZNAUT. You can go to isnot.com and see kind of my portfolio site. You can go to isnot.itch.io, see all my games. A lot of them are free and play in your browsers. Check them out. And then I am also isnot.com on Blue Sky. That's kind of my main social media squeeze at this point.
Been the best one to be on at this point, it feels
Yeah,
like.
I think so.
Awesome. Well, Izzy, thank you so much, guys. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe the channel because YouTube, that's just how it works. I am Boss Monster Kaiju on just about every social media that I care to be a part of anymore at this point, or Twitch, YouTube, Blue Sky, Instagram, other dumber ones that are out there. Enjoy this. Plenty more interviews, plenty of stuff happening here on the channel. Izzy, one more time, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you all at home watching. Until next time, I normally have a pen on me to throw, and I don't this time. Stay cool, stay hip, stay heavy. Good night.